Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode here from GuigLit. Thank you as always for your support, it truly means the world to me. Today is a subscriber special. We are looking at All My Sons and I've picked out some key themes as well as some quotes to go along with it, plus what I'd recommend looking into in terms of the quotes. So, as always, be sure to give this video a thumbs up, make sure to share it with all your friends and family and hit the bell icon to be regularly updated with all things books, beards and beyond. If you haven't already, why not give GuigLit a follow on Twitter, Instagram and TikTok, where we post regularly. So, what you can do with today's video, lots of different things. First of all, you can make sure you take notes as you go. Please ask questions in the comments. I promise to get back to every single one of them. That is the GuigLit guarantee. As well as this, annotate your copies of today's text along with the comments and suggestions I provide. Why not also use this as a revision tool? Share this video with your friends, classmates, people who are studying the text as well, so you can gain more out of it and share your thoughts and feelings. This is also a very good way of producing some mind maps and more technical information that can help as a revision aid. And lastly, use it as a way of listing examples in the text. So I've broken it down into 4 separate themes, as well as some quotes I would recommend. And with all of these, as always, please drop a comment if there's anything else you'd like me to cover. So the first theme I'd like to cover today in All My Sons is family. Family goes through the core of what this play is. The separation in families, the different thoughts and feelings amongst family members, but also how families react to one another and how they perceive one another as family members. The first quote I picked out is from Chris Keller, where he says, "I've been a good son too long, a good sucker. I'm through with it." Now notice the repetition of the word good here, but also the combination of son and sucker. This kind of implied meaning here from Chris, Joe's son, and Joe's only living son at the time of the play, is this idea that in him conforming to his family's expectations, he has made a fool of himself, and we see this resentment from a younger generation who were not so deeply involved in the war and the profiteering that his father Joe was. In addition, the quote here from Joe Keller is a really important one, and notice with all these quotes I embolden the words I'd personally select further for that assessment objective 2, that sense of deeper understanding. And he says the following: "I don't understand why she had to crucify the man. A father is a father." Notice that very declarative statement of a father is a father, like there's no arguing the statement itself. But also the hyperbole of crucify the man almost brings it back to Jesus, the father and the son there. Is quite an interesting analogy to have. This idea that those who have been punished for the profiteering in war are the ones who suffer the most, irrespective of and deliberately ignorant of the victims who suffered in the plane crashes themselves. In addition, this quote again from Keller, Chris, I did it for you. It was a chance and I took it for you." Notice the burden of guilt that Joe is putting on his son here deliberately. This idea that family implies obligation and family implies loyalty and duty, that Joe did this not for himself but for the sake and betterment of his own son. Lastly, Chris's quote here is really interesting, where he says, "I know you're no worse than most men, but I thought you were better. I never saw you as a man, I saw you as my father." It's a really important change in noun there from man to father, as if the father and a father figure is bigger and greater than what the expectations of being a mere man is. We can see this in some of Arthur Miller's other plays as well, most notably Death of a Salesman, where the idea of masculine identity, particularly in being a father, is very much discussed and debated. Up next we have the theme of loss and memory. Now the whole play is pervaded with and contains so many different references to loss, whether it's the loss of a family member in the literal sense, the loss of a family member who's been imprisoned, and the memory of them and how we reconcile that sense of loss is really important as well. The first quote I've selected today is from Anne, and it says, "I guess I never grew up. It almost seems that Mom and Pop are in there now. Gosh, those dear, dead days beyond recall." Notice the way she says, "I never grew up." This idea that memory and loss has left her stuck almost in a childlike manner. But not only that, notice the way she says mom and pop. It's quite childlike language to describe her parents, even when she has grown up as she has. In addition, notice the alliterative phrase "dear dead days." There's a sense that Anne has come to peace with it. Dead days in that they are long gone, but they are dear to her, they're fond to her, that she can look back on them with a sense of peace and understanding. Next quote here we have is from Joe himself, where he's referring to his wife, how she's dreaming about him again. She's walking around at night, obviously in reference to this sense of their lost son who has died or is at that point in the play presumed missing in action. Notice the repetition of again, that this is something Keller's wife has been doing repeatedly, but walking around at night, this idea of an emotional and spiritual disturbance, this idea that she is restless and haunted by the loss of her own son, and that while rather than being a memory, she's trying to keep that semblance of him alive. In addition, we have a little dialogue here that happens between Mrs. Keller and Anne Diva, where she says emotionally, notice the stage direction by Miller there, you think of him, you see, triumphantly. She thinks of him, he's in your thoughts. Anne replies, that's a funny thing to say. How could I help remembering him? Notice the contrast in verbs of thinks and remember. To think of someone implies present tense, implies living memory, someone who may be there. There's a subtle implication of that. Whereas remember implies a past, implies a death, implies a bereavement there. And we see two very contrasting thoughts on loss there. Whereas one, in the mother figure, is trying to reconcile herself with the idea that he is in your thoughts. There's a present tense nature of a lot of what she's saying there, and she feels she's vindicated by Anne. Anne looks on her comments with bemusement and says, remembering him. There's almost a sense of someone, not in mourning, but someone who's reconciled themselves to the fact that someone has passed on. So we see some two very contrasting feelings that centre around the nature of loss and memory. In addition, we then have the theme of guilt. Now, guilt comes across in a number of different ways here, and how it is not just presented, but how characters struggle to reconcile themselves with guilt. We have these first two quotes from Joe Keller. She thinks he's coming back, Chris. You marry that girl and you're pronouncing him dead. Now what's going to happen to Mother? Do you know? I don't. Here Joe is deliberately putting the onus and shifting the blame on Chris when he knows full well that his faulty aircraft parts, while he can try and blame others and tries to throw others under the proverbial bus, he knows that those faulty parts have led to the deaths of servicemen. And in doing so, he's trying to shift the blame again here. Notice the pronoun you, your, do you know. He's trying to say that in Chris marrying, that he is going to destroy the integrity of the family and most specifically ruin his own mother and Joe's wife. We then have this dialogue between Joe and his wife where she says, you above all have got to believe you. And he rises, why me above all? She replies, just don't stop believing. What does that mean, me above all? Notice that imperative phrase, don't stop believing, the sense of hope. But she's also putting the onus back there on Joe Keller himself, which is quite interesting, and it leaves him perplexed. Notice the repetition of the quote, me above all, the question itself. As well as this, notice we have here Chris, and his living existence creates a sense of guilt. The fact he knows he's alive when his own brother isn't, as well as many others. He says, I felt wrong to be alive, to open the bank book, to drive the new car, to see the new refrigerator. Chris's guilt leaves him not only straddling the lines between life and death, but it also leaves him in two separate worlds, of those of the new world, the post-war society of materialism, the refrigerator, the car, the bank book, and those that never got to experience it. So he feels that guilt is very much living within him in everything he does. Notice there are myriad different actions there that reflect that. And lastly, we get another quote from Chris. Yesterday they flew in a load of papers from the States and I read about Dad and your father being convicted. I can't express myself. I can't tell you how I feel. I can't bear to live anymore. So the guilt here, unlike his father who tries to deflect guilt for a long time until it becomes all-consuming, Chris is someone who learns to live with this sense of guilt and responsibility in a way his father couldn't. And in doing so, him and Anne moving, or the sense of them moving at the end of the play, gives this a sense of almost like a tragedy, that they're the new order that replaced this guilt-ridden generation that came before them, best epitomised, by Joe Keller. And lastly, we have this theme of wealth. Obviously, we're talking about a society here where wealth is very much growing in a post-war society. We have an increased sense of materialism, and we see this in the initial stage directions by Miller, where he says how the house is 2 stories high, had 7 rooms. It would have cost perhaps 15,000 in the early 20s when it was built. So we see lots of little indications from the very get-go that the Kellers live in somewhat of a level of material luxury, or certainly material comfort is probably a better phrase to use. In addition, we get the quote from Chris, if I had to grub for money, notice the verb grub there, like as it's something that is a grind, something that is takes an awful lot of energy and saps a lot of spirit. If I had to grub for money all day long, at least at evening, I want it beautiful. I want a family. I want some kids. I want to build something I can give myself to. Annie is in the middle of that. The repetition of want there, I want, playing on this sense of desire and consumerism that Chris is living to purchase and living to create an identity that can best be reinforced through material gain. Following this, we have another short quote here from Keller that kind of shows his moral hypocrisy. When Keller simply says, I can afford another bag of potatoes, he's kind of reinforcing the amount of money upon which he's not only accrued, but also we have the hypocrisy here of a man who not flaunts, but certainly suggests he is rather flush with money, or he is materially comfortable, and yet he's made that money off the back of individuals who cost their lives through his scrimping and is almost cheating the system by selling faulty used parts. So there's an element of hypocrisy there in Weller's exclamation, a simple exclamation of a relative level of wealth. And lastly, we have another quote here from Keller towards the end of the play where he says, who worked for nothing in that war? It's dollars and cents, nickels and dimes. War and peace, it's nickels and dimes. What's clean? Half the goddamn country has got to go if I go. Notice here that he can't reconcile himself to that, and he equates the pursuit of wealth with war and peace, trying to argue that there's a moral justification, or certainly a moral murkiness, to his pursuits, just as much as there are towards the act of war, trying to draw parallels between the two. He also says that in that rhetorical question, who worked for nothing, almost as if to excuse himself from the fact that he made money off the negligent deaths of servicemen. Then he uses that repetition of nickels and dimes, war and peace, as if they're one and the same. But also by saying half the goddamn country and comparing that to him, saying that he feels his lack of moral compass is no different to that of the rest of society at that time. So that concludes today's video. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, be sure to like, share and subscribe. You can find GuigLit across all different social media channels. Don't forget to drop a comment if you have a question. That's the GuigLit guarantee. And until next time, all the very best. Take care and bye-bye.